Last thing we really covered last week was briefly adding cameras. So far we've been used to using the default camera. We can have as many cameras as we want. Let's say I want in a scene something kind of like that. I simply hit that and hit add camera. And then later on, I want something more like this. I'll add another camera. And you can add as many cameras as you want, and then to bounce between them, I want to use camera 1 that I just added. I want to bounce over to camera. I want to go back to camera 1. If you find yourself zooming in and out doing detailed modeling, I will use multiple cameras for certain areas when I'm really like spending a lot of time on modeling, so I don't have to move in and out. And so it's not difficult to add the cameras. We can then zoom out and notice that these cameras are actually look like physical objects in space. So we can move our cameras. We can change the field of view for our cameras. We can rotate our cameras. We can move them around as if they're anything out there. Okay. You can also do that interactively if we're in the camera. You notice I'm in camera 1. I've got camera 1 selected. Now that's my camera 1. Which is both good and bad. What happens to a lot of students, they'll think they have their cameras all set, and they will accidentally be inside of one of their cameras instead of the default camera. Oh my gosh, I spent 20 minutes getting my camera just perfect, and now I've gone and repositioned it without meaning to. So always make sure that that you know which camera you're working in. Just like the light, we can add a target target to a camera. Tag target. I want that camera to always be pointing at the center of that figure. Now, I should have made it point towards its head, but wherever that figure goes, that camera is going to keep it locked in the very center. You'll notice that the center axis of that figure is locked into the center of that camera at all times. And so we can also have a null object as a target and then move the null object and the camera will follow it. That's another way we can use it. Let me kill that target tag. We can, as we're in the camera, and there are lots of properties for the camera, but the main ones that you're going to focus on, if you're used to photography, you can think of focal length. You know the 28mm lens is fairly wide angle, and a 200mm lens is a zoom. Really, how those zoom lenses and wide angles work, the shorter the lens, the wider the field of view. We don't somehow mysteriously zoom in. What we do is we focus as we zoom in on a narrower and narrower part of our field of vision. And so if you're not comfortable with focal length, we can also sit there and do field of view and get the same base. You'll notice the focal length is completely tied to the field of view. You will also notice that as you start placing cameras and playing with cameras, and there is a difference between zooming in on something that's taken at a standard, relatively standard field of view, but if I were to take it down to a fairly narrow field of view and get that same look, you'll start to notice some exaggeration start taking place. See how it's really stretching things? I'm really zoomed in. That's what your phones do to you. Not to that extent. But a wide angle you have to round the glass in order to get the light focused from the far edges. And so we get a distortion or fisheye effect as we get really wide. And so as you start playing, gee, do I zoom in on this person or do I move the camera closer? You're going to get different effects based on that field of vision. As a portrait photographer, I like to work with a zoom lens. Even though we think of the distance when we think of zooms and wide angles, wide angles will exaggerate distance. That's why your noses look big in selfies and when you take a picture close up. Telephoto lenses, zoom lenses, will compress distance, and so it starts to smooth out or de-emphasize facial features. And so most portrait photographers work with anywhere from an 85 millimeter to 200 millimeter lens. Basically, if I was shooting a model with a 200 millimeter lens, I'd be on this side of the room and she'd be way over there, which you think, wow, she's so far away, but it would actually be flattering by shooting that far away. And so you want to think about that. Then we also think, once we get animating, if we move a camera back and forth, do y'all know what that's called? That's a pan movement. Rotating back and forth or up and down is called pan. If I stand still and change that field of view by zooming in, that would be a zoom motion. If, however, I were to not change that field of motion and animate the camera's position moving closer, similar type of effect, but slightly different because of the optics of the lens, that would most likely be a track. A track is where we basically put a camera on a dolly and we push it around. Okay, so that would be a track movement. So we have pans, we have tracks, we have zooms, and we have a fourth major movement that I just totally drew a blank on. That's all right. We'll animate the cameras this week and it'll come back to me. Okay. Oh, no, that would be a track. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Anyways, that's the basics of cameras. Any questions? No? Cool.